Barely past the election, President Obama can't catch a break. He's got a full plate of issues going into his second term. Our political expert, Michael McKoy, fellow at Rutgers University, joins us with a look at how this second term is shaping up. Thanks for joining us today.
Always glad to be here.
What do you see as the single, or is there a single biggest issue that the president's got in front of him?
Well, the biggest issue he's got right now is really restructuring America's sort of financial foundation. I think that's the thing that he wants to tackle the most, which is finally putting us on a good budget footing with both our tax structure, our entitlement structure, so that we aren't fighting these budget battles every 2 years, and that we aren't going into deficits that will ultimately bankrupt us. So that when we look at the world, we see Europe in crisis, China's economic situation starting to stagger. So this is really the U.S. moment to sort of reclaim that top spot alone, and it's really these budget negotiations we'll see if the U.S. is in a position to do that.
Mm-hmm. Do you see the president going back to impose any more kinds of taking a hard line against Wall Street, specifically the banks? They have been at the center of the American economic demise. I wonder if that's part of the plan.
I don't think the president wants to pick any fights with Wall Street anymore. I think that he and his administration realized that that was one of the sort of drawbacks of his first term. He got some blowback from that in the election. I think he really wants to actually reach out, repair those relations, because he actually had a very good relationship with Wall Street during his first presidential campaign, and that soured during his first term. I think he very much wants to repair those relations. I think who he really wants to take a hard line with is congressional Republicans. He really wants to cow them. He feels that his battles with them, particularly over the budget in 2011, really weakened him, and they actually angered him. They made him feel angry about the way he was unable to change Washington, and I think that's the fight he wants. I don't think he necessarily wants to be a fight, but he certainly wants a victory. He wants to show that he's the president, he sets the agenda, they can offer ideas, they can work together, but they will no longer dominate his policy agenda.
Mm-hmm. He's had the success in the first term of Obamacare. Yeah, he wanted to get that installed. Now the Republicans have raised that as a potential bargaining chip in dealing with these other issues, the fiscal cliff and those kind of things. Is that going to happen?
No. I mean, I would, or at least I should say, I would be very surprised if it did. I think that for the president, for his allies, things concerning, Obamacare are off the table. He got it passed. It was a major campaign issue. He won on that issue. I don't think that's really what's going to be on the table. I think these issues of retirement age for Social Security, for Medicare, I think the Democrats, or at least some moderate Democrats, including in the administration, are starting to signal they're willing to put that on the table if they can get the tax increases, the revenue increases that they're looking for. But things involving Obamacare, in terms of any major revoking of anything that was in those laws, they're not looking at. Now, if there can be additions that show, okay, we're going to even more lower costs, I think the administration is very happy to look at that. Mm-hmm. But in terms of any signature parts of the legislation, I think Republicans have even signaled that they're just, except for members of sort of the Tea Party caucus, most of the Republican leadership has already signaled that they're not willing to do that fight again.
Now, you look at the second term, and you can look at it in two ways. Either he's, as some might call, lame duck, that he's got a Republican-controlled House that's not going to do anything he wants to do for the next 4 years, and he's just going to ride it out. Or he's got additional power, having been elected by the people to say, look, we like where you're going, we want you to go further. How does he balance those two? Where do you see
that is always the biggest struggle of, or at least sort of the big institutional struggle of a second-term president. And really the way he balances that out is by going hard fast, because once we get into the second half of his term, once the midterm elections come, on a domestic side, he basically is a lame duck. And that's why a lot of times we see for presidents in their second half of their second term, they focus a lot on foreign policy. Reagan looking for arms treaties with the Soviets, President Bush doing, or the second President Bush doing the surge in Iraq. So the second part of your second term, even President Clinton trying to find a deal with the Israeli and Palestinians, still looking at that today, that all usually happens in the second half of the second term, because Congress and the domestic side, they see the president really as a lame duck. He's not involved in these issues anymore. Mm-hmm. So it's really going to have to be in the first half of his second term that President Obama really has to deal with a lot of these fiscal issues that, from his perspective, that's really what he wants to be his legacy. He really wants his legacy to be that he has finally stabilized the New Deal program of Franklin Roosevelt. He's finally put Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid on solvent ground. ground, and he's finally given us a strong tax base to do that. That's what he wants his domestic agenda to be, and if it's going to pass, it has to be in the first half of his second term.
Do world events get in the way of that? I mean, we've got
Always.
this whole Benghazi thing going on. The Middle East is still in turmoil. Does that get in his way?
They always do. And you saw that Republicans, and I think they're coming from a very genuine position caring about this issue about Benghazi, starting to try to push out his leverage early on, trying to hinder the potential nomination of Susan Rice as Secretary of State. But we're seeing Republicans starting to sort of back away from that over the weekend. They made a lot more conciliatory comments about Susan Rice, saying, well, at least we'll hear her out, see what her side of the issue is. But yeah, I mean, again, no one really expected Israel and Palestine to blow up again. This is just the perennial issue of U.S. International relations. And they can always sidetrack you. I mean, 9/11 can sidetrack you. I mean, so you just don't know what's coming. But I think, one thing about presidents is often talked about a second-term slump. We see a lot of scandals often come in the second term, but second-term presidents have had a first term. They know the game better, and I think President Obama is really focused on this fiscal agenda.
So you see the domestic side being much more important first 2 years.
I think that's what he wants. Now, again, we can't control foreign events. I mean, if the European economy collapses, that's a very big thing. But for what his plans, his desires are, is that by the end of 2013, that the White House and the Republican Congress have finally come to terms with a sustainable agreement.
It's interesting you mentioned that relationship. We saw the first 4 years, it was, knocking heads the whole 4 years. You see that changing significantly?
I think that's a really good question, and I wish I had a better answer. I really don't know, because I think right now the problem is I don't think the Republican caucus in the House knows what it wants. I think that they are reeling from an election loss that they really didn't expect. And I think in the last 2 weeks of the campaign, they really believed, Republicans across the board, really believed Mitt Romney was going to win. So on one hand, they're reeling from this, but on the other hand, they were reelected, and they still control the House. So they have to figure out what they want their agenda to be. You can tell Speaker John Boehner, he wants to make this deal. He wants his legacy to be with the president that we put the United States on a sound financial base, but there's a genuine ideological fight within the Republican Party about the issue of taxes, the issue of how you raise revenue, the issues of spending, and they really need to resolve that within themselves before they can come to terms with the president.
We're going to stop there. Always a pleasure.
Always glad to be here.
Look forward to having you again.
Thank you very much.